David Hunker, and I lead Ernst & Young's Shareholder Activism defense practice. Today, we're going to discuss one of the highest profile topics in shareholder activism in the current environment, ESG. The tactics shareholder activists have used to pressure companies and the issues they've highlighted to investors to garner support have evolved over the past decade. Gone are the days of activists proposing financial engineering strategies to deliver value to shareholders, as activists have focused on companies optimizing their portfolios and operations instead. More recently, activists have followed the lead of institutional investors and zeroed in on environmental, social, and governance initiatives, or ESG. While ESG is not a new topic by any means, its rise in importance within the broader capital markets is a more recent development. For years, only the G, governance, received much attention from activists and institutional investors. In response, companies adopted governance structures following pressure from activists and non-activists alike, creating a new set of governance standards for public companies. Now that much of the low-hanging governance fruit has been picked and broader societal views have changed, investors have shifted their attention to the environmental and social components of ESG. Aiding this shift to ESG-focused investing has been the rapid rise in assets under management directed towards passive investments. Nearly half of all U.S. assets under management are now held in passively managed funds, which means index funds now hold multiple spots in the average public company's top 10 shareholder list. As passive strategies gain dominance, passive fund complexes steadily built up their proxy voting and governance teams that today set the agenda with respect to the ESG expectations of public companies. These expectations are constantly in flux and are difficult to quantify. Activists take advantage of this environment by shining a light on target companies' ESG shortcomings, exposing issues shareholders might or might not have previously considered. Some activists have gone a step beyond and set up activist funds entirely dedicated to ESG investing and agitation. Some of these new funds share the "it will create value eventually" thesis, while others are capitalizing on the wave of ESG-focused change happening across multiple industries. With an ESG focus, these funds have an improved ability to attract capital, even in a world shifting to passively managed strategies. Regardless of whether a campaign is waged by an ESG-specific or a traditional activist fund, it's important to know that ESG drives shareholder voting behaviors. ESG missteps attract media attention that could create an opportunity for activists to highlight issues unrelated to the original ESG story or cause a rift in shareholder trust. An activist doesn't necessarily have to prove that its specific critique or proposal is correct. Rather, it's the general call for change that influences shareholder votes. Once weaknesses have been identified, the idea of new blood in the boardroom is ultimately what shareholders are calling for when they support an activist with their votes. The board must take ownership of the ESG agenda within the company. In doing so, the board can meaningfully lessen the company's risk of activism and raise its profile within the ranks of leading ESG investment opportunities. Managing a company's ESG agenda is threefold. The board must understand what current leading practices and shareholder expectations are regarding ESG. It must confirm ESG standards and goals are being met by the company, and it must verify its ESG efforts and accomplishments are effectively being communicated to the street. We have identified 5 key considerations for boards looking to mitigate ESG risks and leverage ESG strengths to drive long-term value for shareholders. First, it's important to keep in mind ESG expectations are always changing. It's a continual process and commitment, not a one-time exercise. To avoid becoming an ESG laggard, establish recurring board-level processes to stay on top of trends and implement change as needed. This can be done through the creation or assignment to a committee and a detailed outline of how the rest of the board and management will be involved in ESG-related responsibilities. Second is shareholder engagement. As is relevant across all investor communication, regular and direct engagement is vital to a successful ESG program. It not only communicates to the street that the board is actively involved in ESG agenda development, but provides an opportunity for the board to reinforce the centrality of ESG to the broader corporate strategy and gain candid shareholder feedback. Both elements are critical to creating a meaningful, credible ESG strategy. Next, it's important to identify key stakeholders beyond the shareholder base. This can include employees, customers, or suppliers, and demonstrates to the street and the broader environment the commitment to and depth of the ESG agenda. Such trust-building exercises can be very effective in gaining and retaining support from key shareholders. Most importantly, act. Once weaknesses are identified, address shortcomings before an activist does. Being a leader rather than a follower can be more important in the current environment than the actions themselves. Lastly, communicate your story to the street. Now is not the time to be humble. Highlight the detailed process and key accomplishments of the ESG agenda as you would the company's business strategy. There is no hiding shortcomings from investors, so be upfront and prepared to explain how the board plans to address them in the future. Just as in regular shareholder communications, be direct and transparent. Shareholders appreciate a no-nonsense approach. ESG is more than just a trend. It is an issue that is becoming increasingly important for every publicly traded company, especially in relation to shareholder activism. While not a cure-all for activism risk, raising a company's ESG standards and profile draws support from key shareholders, which is critical to retaining shareholder support in a contested proxy fight. Proactive board involvement is vital to setting and communicating company ESG expectations. Active engagement, introspection, action, and transparency will allow boards to position their companies as ESG leaders rather than followers. I hope this has provided you with some helpful insights into ESG's impact on shareholder activism, and feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions or would like to discuss further. Thank you.